of a couch. We have this object that we want a character to be able to sit in and have it react. So, for example, I have a sphere here. If I suddenly put this on the sofa cushion, I want it to be able to smush down. I want to be able to have that control. But the problem is, this is just a piece of geometry. I can't animate that section right there. As an animator, what do? Do I just kind of leave it and hope for the best? Do I just go, imagine that the couch doesn't look like a piece of plywood? I could. That's not necessarily a bad thing. But it would still be nice if I could get that softness in there, that little flex of the cushion, and show how hard or maybe how incredibly soft this couch is. So, how can I do this? Well, the way you don't really want to do this is to select the couch and start to animate the vertices. I've seen people try to do it this way. There's a few negatives to this. So essentially what you would do is take your object, right click, select vertices. I can select the vertices right here. So that's the points of the object. And then I could just start moving these and animate them. I can even turn off on soft select by hitting B as in beta. And then by holding down B, I can scale that soft selection up and down. And now I can move a bigger portion. And you can key those. So you can see here, this is the list of CVs. So control vertices. I can hit S to set a key and actually animate those. This is not a good thing to do. The main reason is you can't undo or zero them out. So for example, let's just take one vertice here. We've got that one vertice. If I move it, how do I bring it back to its zeroed out position? How do I get it back to normal? If you look at the value, no vertice is zeroed out. They all have these basically random, or what seems like random values. So if you move a whole section and you don't key it correctly, you'd better key it before you move, because otherwise you're not getting it back into shape. That's not a good way to work. It's very risky and it's very hard to deal with, because now I'm trying to animate, like, look how many points there are, and each one has an individual key, which means that if I accidentally move one keyframe off, now I've got one vertex that's just doing its own thing. It gets very tedious. You can do it. I've seen people do it, and I've done it myself in the past. But it's definitely more of a headache, especially if you just forget one key or delete the wrong key, suddenly the whole thing messes up. So not ideal. It also is a lot of manual work where you have to select, like you see how many vertices there are. You have to go through and select all of them. Is a pain. So a better way when you're trying to do a deformation, let's move this sphere out of the way here, is to use deformers. Now, one of the best deformers you can use for something like this is a lattice deformer. So a lattice deformer, I'll select my object, go to my animation menu set, and then go to deform, and we have a lattice right here. And essentially a lattice deformer creates a box around your object that you can then distort. So by default, I'm just going to select this here, lattice point. I can just take this point and now it'll deform the entire object within that box, which is really nice. Now you'll notice it's affecting the entire sofa. That's something we don't really want. So the basics of using a lattice deformer is you create the lattice and then you want to set it to the area you want to deform. So let's just focus on the screen left cushion right here, not the back and nothing else. We'll just do the one cushion. So how do we move this? How do we focus on just that area? Well, if you go to the outliner, a lattice is made out of two different objects. You actually have the lattice, that's the part that deforms. And then you have the base, which is this box that contains the lattice or contains the positional information of the lattice. Now you'll notice if I move the base on its own, we get weird things. It's distorting in horrible ways. But if I take the lattice and the base together right here, I can now move these and scale them to match a specific area. So only the area I want to deform. So let me move this here. You don't have to be super precise, but the closer the better. So I want it to fit the width of this cushion here. Let's just do the height of the cushion. And then the width of the cushion. Depth of it. Now you want to make sure anything you want to distort is within that lattice. If anything is out of it, let's actually do this here. Leave that front end out. Now if I adjust my lattice points, make sure I just adjust the lattice points here. You'll notice I can just affect this one little C cushion right there. But that front edge, because it was left out, you'll notice that doesn't move. So make sure that as you're setting your area, you totally envelop the area you want to affect. So like that. That should be the whole thing. I'll maybe make it a little bit bigger just for safety. Okay. So we've got our lattice in place. Great. Now we have the lattice in place. I want to add a deformation down the middle. The character is going to sit in the middle of the cushion and should sink down. Well, my detail on the lattice isn't really set up for that. The next step is we need to set up our divisions on the lattice. So I'm going to remove the T divisions, that's the up and down. And then I'm going to just add more S and U divisions. STU in lattices is X, Y, and Z. It's the same thing. It's like how you have U and V in textures. Different aspects of 3D modeling or 3D programs use different coordinates. Sometimes it's X, Y, Z. Sometimes it's STU. Sometimes it's U and V. Is really just the same things, just different names for the same thing. So I'm going to add, let's go 3 and 3. We don't want to go too far with this. Okay. So now with this, I can take my lattice points and let's just take that front edge. Let's imagine someone sits right in the middle on the front edge. Whoop. There we go. We get that nice little deformation. And notice how that piece got left behind? Right there. See how my lattice is cutting through the object? It wasn't big enough. So let's make it just a little bit bigger. There we go. You want to make sure nothing gets left behind from your lattice. So lattice point once again. Take that front edge. Whoop. Now we get that little bit of a cushion sit right in there. And the more lattice points you add, the more detail you'll be able to put in, the more you're going to be able to animate this. Now, this is where it's really up to you how much detail you want in here. Less detail is easier to animate. You have less points to work with. More detail will allow you to hold things a little bit more. So what I mean by hold things is right now, if I move this middle point here, notice how it's starting to stretch the arm right there. Because this line is going from the middle all the way to the far corner here, it's going to pull everything connected to that, which means that we're going to start getting deformation in, for example, the extremes right here. If I want to avoid that, I would increase my divisions. So let's maybe go 4 divisions, or let's actually go 5. So we still have that center line. Now I can move this center point and it's not affecting anything over here. I now have a little bit more finesse on this side right there and a little bit more on this side. But it also means I have more points to animate. So the key to the lattice here is you want enough points that you have the control you want, but only that. The more you go, the more it's just going to be a nightmare to work with. So you can turn on soft selection as well for this. So now I can pull on this lattice and you can see it's affecting a whole range there, which is also really nice. So with this, we can now start animating this, and we're not animating individual vertices. We're animating kind of range of vertices, which is really nice. Now, we still have an issue here, which is that the lattice points are a pain to animate. And Blaze, you kind of mentioned it right there. Lattice points are not easy to animate. You have to right click, go to lattice points, and then move them. And they have the same issue as vertices. If I select my CV right here, which is the lattice point, you can see that the values are not zeroed out. And they're not all the same. This has a value of 0.25, 0.5, 0.5, 0, 0.5, 0.5, negative 2.5. So it's basically you have 0 in the middle, 0.25, 0.5, negative 0.25, negative 0.5 right there. And all of them have all of these different values. This is going to be a nightmare to try and zero out. If I'm animating this and then, oops, I forgot to set a key, how do I get it back to normal if I don't have any undos? This is going to be a nightmare. I don't like animating these if I can avoid it. Let's see, if you key with a soft selection, actually that's a good point. Let's actually try that out. So if I key this here and move this up right there, actually it didn't key for some reason. Undo. Okay. Key here. Move this up. Yeah, it does key them. So you can see they're moving as well. Let's turn off soft selection. Yeah. It's actually a good thing to know. It'll key anything that's affected. So how do we save these positions? How do we keep this as its default? There's a few different ways of doing it, but one of my favorites is using clusters. So clusters is a deformer that basically, you can almost think of it like containing a selection of objects or a selection of items. So for example, vertices, edges, faces. It just holds them and allows you to move them using one control. So for example, here, I could take this lattice point on the front. Let's actually turn off my poly selection. Don't really need that right now. And I'm going to go to deform and I'm going to create a cluster right there. Now with this cluster handle, I can just select that and move that around. That selects that lattice point. I could have multiple lattice points selected. So for example, let's just do this here. Lattice point. I'm going to just randomly select this one and then deform cluster. Now I've got a cluster right here that moves both of those. So you can do whatever selection you want in there and essentially have a quick handle that you can select for that. And for lattices, this is what I'll usually use because oftentimes it's just, for example, take this front edge and animate that moving down a little bit. So let's actually create a few quick clusters here. So select that, deform cluster. Next lattice point, select that. I'm going to hit G as in gorilla. That will repeat the last command, which will create a cluster. And we'll just kind of, I'm not going to do the whole thing. I'm just going to do this central part here. There we go. Now we've got clusters here that I can use to animate and move these around. So we can get something like that. Maybe if they're going to sit right in the middle here, really push that down and then have a little bit of sag around. So you have a lot of fine-tuned controls, but clusters are zeroed out. So, maybe I don't want this seat in there, or maybe I want to just reset it back to position. Select all my clusters, and let's just do the translates rotates. Boop, back to normal. Easy to key. Now I can animate this to my heart's content, get all of the nice squishiness in there. Yay. Very nice. Now, what are the disadvantages of using something like a lattice? Well, one of them is that you can get very sharp transitions to things. So let's actually add a few more clusters here. So deform cluster. And we'll select here, deform cluster. Now, we're right on the edge between the lattice and the rest of the couch. If I move this here, notice how we get this really sharp cut. right there. It doesn't really look good. A couch should have a reaction onto the next part of the couch. Even though I do want a little bit of a separation, it should feel kind of organic. It shouldn't feel like there's this harsh cut. How do I avoid that? Well, I could make the lattice a little bit bigger. I could do that, but maybe I just want to animate this section. I don't want to deal with the rest. What do I do? Well, there's a often underused deformer in Maya that can be very helpful with this. And actually there's two of them. So if I select the couch here, I will go to deform, and we have the delta mush deformation, which is just like one of the coolest names, and the tension deformation. Both of these will do a very similar thing. So let's actually just apply the delta mush right now. So I've applied a delta mush, and basically what that does is it creates an envelope around the object that makes it so that, let's actually undo here. If I normally select one vertex here and move it up, you can see that it just moves on its own. If I apply a delta mush and then take that one vertex and move it, it's taking the entire area and affecting that. It's distributing that change across all of the connections around it. What this means now is if I take this cluster and let's turn off geo right there so we don't accidentally select that and move it. See how it's affecting the other piece of the sofa right there? Now, if I start animating that, we get a little bit of a connection. Yeah, exactly. It breathes. It feels a little bit more soft and alive. And even if I use these, now we're starting to get that, like, pushing this down, and we get that little separation there. It definitely softens the effect of the animation, but now it feels even more like a soft object. So it just kind of gets that extra level of detail, which is really cool. And it does it automatically. Now, if we want to adjust the radius of that, you would go into your delta mush and you'd change your smoothing iterations. The higher the iteration, the more it's going to grab the rest of it and try to smooth it out. The lower this is, the more you're going to get like the very specific deformation. And you can see when it's turned off, this is what we're getting. You can see this very sharp, jagged edge, which is normal for lattices. But as soon as I even apply just a little bit of it, we start to get a little bit more of a soft object, as if the cloth is being pulled by that front edge being dipped down. So this is where you start to really get that soft, organic feeling to an object. And you can apply this to anything, honestly. You don't even need the lattice deformer. The lattice deformer just gives us the control. But there we go. Now we've got a couch cushion that I can just animate and get that nice impact right in there. So if the ball was going to land in the middle, I can just select this, boop, push that down, maybe a little bit right here and here, and then maybe a little bit on the front edge there, maybe right in the center there. So we get that nice dip right there. And now we can put our sphere, dip, right in the center there, and we've got that little dip for it to sit in. So that's the basics of it. It's just doing this and then animating it by hand, which honestly does not take a lot of time. You just match it to your character. So there we go. Now, let's say we want to be able to animate this. This is kind of taking it to step 2. We've got this couch here, but now we want the character to sit on the couch and they're just going to launch themselves onto the couch. They're not going to sit gently. They're going to like maybe get thrown back into the couch. And as they hit the couch, the whole couch is going to slide backwards and just go back. Well, when that happens, notice how the lattice deformer doesn't move with it. Now, if I start deforming this, so let's take our clusters here, move them up and down, nothing happens. The couch has left the lattice behind, and is no longer being affected. You can see it as I move it, how it's just, the deformations are going crazy here. So this is not great. I can't move the couch. I could try to move the lattice deform and everything together with it, but now that's going to be a real pain. We also run into the issue of if I just select everything and move them together, well, that's not right. We're starting to get these really strange deformations in there. And these are called double transformations. Essentially, what's happening is Maya is calculating things twice. We have the move that I'm doing, and then Maya's going, ooh, something's connected to this. I'll move it for you. Moves it a second time. So how do we deal with all of this? How do we get this to actually move with the couch? And maybe I just want to rotate it and reposition it in my scene, just like that. How can we get this to work? Well, there's a few different things we're going to need to do. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to reorganize my shot a little bit here in the outliner to make it easy to contain things. So we've got our couch. This is good. It can stay right here. Our lattice and base, when you are moving the lattice and base with an object, it's good to move them all together like so. An easier way to do this is if you just take your lattice and base and group them together, and we'll call this lattice. Always name your groups and objects. Lattice group right here. So now the lattice group is just going to move the entire thing for me. That whole base and lattice together. There we go. Now from here, I could start parenting things together, just these objects as they are. But I usually prefer, if I'm going to animate something, I want to have a control ring. Just like how a rig has a ring that you can use to animate, I want to do that here. So I'm going to go to create NURBS primitives, and I'm going to create a circle. And this is going to be my sofa control ring right here. I'm just going to set this, let's say right around here. Once I've got it into place, I'm going to go to modify freeze transformations. This is going to take my transformations here and zero them out, basically reset them. So now this is the default position right there. I'm also going to rename this to sofa underscore root control. So this is my sofa root. And with this, let's actually make sure I don't have shape nodes in there. This is going to be the main controller that we're going to use to move everything. And we have a few different ways we can set this up. So we've got our sofa root. The way I usually like to set this up is to constrain objects to it. So I'm going to actually take my couch here. This is just a typical rigging setup that I use. I'll take the geometry. I'll group that as well. And I'm just going to call this sofa geo. So if ever you have multiple pieces of geometry, everything's kept in there. You can see how I'm starting to organize everything together. We've got the geometry, we've got the group, and then let's take all of these and then just call this our cluster group. There we go. Nice and organized. Now, the way we can have the root control here control these objects is we can just take these and parent them to the sofa control right there. And this will allow me to just take that and move it around. I didn't do the clusters yet for a specific reason. But there you go. It's done. I don't like to do this personally. The reason being, look at how the couch is all lit up and everything is green. I don't like this personally. When I select a control, I want to see the control selected. I don't want to see every piece of geometry selected and highlighted, especially on a rig. I don't want to see all that detail. I just want to focus on the pose. So instead of grouping it, I'm going to constrain it. I'm going to take my sofa root right here, and I'm going to constrain the lattice and the sofa geo to that. So take my sofa, so the object that leads first, then the lattice group, go to constrain, and I'm just going to do a parent constraint, and then sofa root to the geo, and then constrain parent, and make sure, let's undo that. I think always double check your settings. Yeah, I had maintain offset turned off. I want that on. So sofa root, once again, lattice, apply that. Sofa root to sofa geo, apply that. Now I select the root. Nothing else looks selected. I move it. I get the exact same results that I had before. Yay. Everything's moving correctly. So from there, what do we do? Well, we run into the clusters now. And the clusters are a little bit of a pain because I could do the same thing. So take the sofa root, take my clusters, constrain parent, and now we get this. Dang it. Essentially, the clusters cannot be moved from where they are. The moment that you move them, they're going to start deforming the sofa. They need to stay in place. This is going to be a nightmare. How do I do this? How do I get them to follow the couch without deforming the couch? Because the way I would have to animate it now is I'll move my couch over here. And now I have to remember the order of the clusters so that I can continue to animate. You can see it's still connected. That's horrible. I don't want to animate like that. Ugh, no. So what I need to do is I need to leave the clusters where they are, but have new controls that tell the cluster how to move. So essentially, let me just give a quick demo here. I'm going to create a NURBS primitive. We'll just create a very basic one here. I'm going to move it all the way out here. Now, I'm going to take this and I'm going to freeze its transformations. Modify, freeze, transform. So now its values equal 0, 0, and 1. Right there. And I'm going to parent it under the sofa root right there. Its values still equal 0, 0, 1. Let's take this cluster as our demo cluster right there. Its values are 0, 0, 1. Perfect. Now, what I want is essentially, as this root moves, you'll notice that the control moves with it, but because it's a child, its values stay zeroed out. It hasn't been affected. It hasn't moved yet. So what this means is I can take that control and connect it to move that cluster for me. So just a quick demo, and then we'll go over the actual process here. I will go into Windows, General Editors, Connection Editor right there. Load the left side, so that's going to be this control here. Load the cluster I want on the right side. And I want to connect the translates, rotates, and scale of the control curve here to affect the translate, rotate, and scale of the cluster. So I want the translates to connect to the translates, rotate to rotate, scale to scale. Essentially what this is doing is going, anything that happens here happens on the cluster. So now if I move this, hey, it moves the cluster. But because it's still technically a separate item and its values don't change when I change the root control, whoop, whoop, it follows along and I can still animate it. So it's kind of a weird little cheat, but it allows us to create controls for our clusters. So let me undo this and we'll go over the actual process now. So we know how we can get it to work. Let's actually make it work. So once again, I'm going to create a little bit of a control. And actually, I'm going to show you a cool little trick. So let's say I find it cool. Maybe you guys won't find it cool, but I like it. Let's say I've got an object here. I want a control curve, but I don't want just a circle. I want kind of this sphere control. You see this on rigs a lot. So I have this, but I want kind of this sphere shape that's a little easier to select. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to duplicate it, and I'm going to rotate the duplicate 90 degrees, like so. I'm going to take this once again, duplicate it, rotate it 90 degrees. Aha! look at that. We've got a little ball that's just going to be a little easier to select from any angle. The problem, though, is that they are still 3 separate items, not one item. I want this to be one single item, one contained shape here. How does this happen? Well, this is where we need to understand a little bit of how Maya works. Essentially, when we're selecting objects here in the outliner, and when we see them selected, we are selecting kind of a higher level object. This is kind of the container that the object lives within. If we go to display and turn on shapes right here, you'll see that every one of these has a shape node underneath it. So here we have the NURB circle and then the NURB circle shape. That is the actual thing that determines what creates this shape. That is the building blocks, the shape node. This creates the circle in our case. Now, what I can do is I can combine these into one container. I can take all of these shape nodes, put them under one container, and that will now be one object containing all these different shapes. The problem is that Maya won't let you do that by default because that's not really something we normally do day to day. So for example, if I take the shape node here, I'm just trying to move the shape node, middle mouse drag to parent it, it just took the entire object. It doesn't think that this is what I want to do because that's not something we normally want to do. So how do we do this? This is where scripting comes in, and knowing a little bit of MelScript can be very, very handy. So let's see. I'm going to take my script window up here. Usually the command line is down at the bottom, but I'm just going to move this up so we can see it. And I'm just going to create a new parent operation. So I want the shape nodes here to be parented under the circle nodes. I'm going to take the 2 children, select the parent. So the 2 shape nodes, then the container. And in the mel command here, I want to just run a command. I want it to parent the 2 objects together, but I'm going to add variables in here. So I want to parent the shape. So I'm just putting hyphen shape, and I want it to be relative to each other. So they're going to parent just in position. So parent hyphen shape hyphen relative. If I hit enter here, look at that. The shape nodes get pulled out of their containers, brought into here. Now, looks like something happened. And what happened is that my values here haven't been zeroed out. So always double check. Make sure freeze transformation is always good to delete the history as well. So edit, delete by type, history. Let's run that script again. So select those, select the container. Once you write the script, just move up, just hit the up arrow. That'll select the last one. Ta-da! There we go. Now I select that NURB circle and we have one entire object. If I select this, it takes the whole thing right there. Now, do you need to do this? No, you don't need to do that at all. You could just use a simple polygon curve. Done. This is just one of those extra things that you can do if you feel like it and feel like kind of making things a little bit more fancy. So we've got our NURB circle here. Let's turn off our shapes. And I'm going to call this, let's see, what should we call this? Let's call this sofa. And then underscore, we'll do, ideally it would be nice to put like front right control. Yeah, so we could have front right, front left. We've got 2 in the center. What could it be? You know, just for sake of ease, I'm just going to do it 1. So sofa underscore control underscore 1. There we go. That way we don't have to worry about a complex name, and I can visually see it here. So we've got our nice little control here. Now I'm just going to snap it to the cluster. So to snap to a cluster, or snap to anything really, I'm just going to take the object, make sure that the middle of the manipulator is selected. So you can see it's yellow there. That means it's going to move in all 3 axes. I'm going to hold down the V key via in vector or Victor. And you'll see that up here, the magnet with the point turns on. This is the point snapping tool. You could also just click up here. I like the shortcut V. And then I'm just going to middle mouse click and drag over the cluster right here. And you can see, boop, that snaps it, boop, right there. Now I can just scale this down, get it to the size I want it to be. I want these controls pretty large so they're easy to select. So maybe around there. And then once it's in place, once again, go to Modify, Freeze Transformations. Now this is its default position. From here, let's just populate the scene. So I'm actually going to hide the sofa geo. So I'm going to take the group here, turn that off. So we just see our lattice. It'll be easier to not accidentally snap to a point on the sofa. I'm just going to duplicate that. Point snap, duplicate, point snap. Make sure I actually duplicate. So point snap, Control D, point snap, Control D, point snap, Control D. Let's go back here and then Control D, point snap. So just like so, there we go. We've got all of our controls in place right there. So with this, we now just have to connect them to the clusters. So we honestly don't actually even need to see our lattice anymore. So I'm going to take the lattice group and hide that. So we now just have our clusters and our controls. So to connect them, we're just going to go through the connection editor we had before. So once again, that's Windows, General Editors, Connection Editor. And I'm going to take my control here on the left. Let's reload that. Let's take our cluster, reload right. And I'm going to connect translates. Translate, rotate to rotate, scale to scale. And we repeat the same thing. So reload them, connect them. It's a little tedious. This is where if you know some mel scripting, is going to help a lot. Now you'll notice, oops, I made a mistake. See how the cluster disappeared there? The reason it disappeared is that I didn't zero out the other duplicates. So this is just an important thing. Always keep this in mind. When you're moving things and when you're starting to rig stuff together, we do not usually want to have values in here. Not in their default state. So I'm going to select all of these. Modify, freeze transformations. Now you can see they're all zeroed out. Let's reconnect that. So translate, translate, rotate, rotate, scale, scale. Now it doesn't move. And let's keep going. So it's a little tedious, but this is the moment where I like having music. Kind of going back to the earlier talk we had. This kind of work gets very tedious. And sometimes you're going to do similar types of work on animation where it's just like cleaning curves or polishing something. And it gets tedious. So having a good playlist and just something you can kind of nod your head to and work in a happy environment makes it so much more fun. And this is like, I'll start listening to the music and just like focus on the music. I don't really have to pay too much attention to what I'm doing here. But there we go. All connected. So with this, we now have all of our controllers set to move the clusters, like so. What this means is that we don't really need to see the clusters anymore. So I'm going to turn that off and let's bring our sofa geo back on. Right there. We have all of these controls. I can move these and haha, they are animating my object for me right there. Now, if I animate this, you'll see that they still stay behind. Dang it, we haven't gotten that connected. Well, honestly, this is pretty simple. I take all of these controls. I'm going to parent them to my root control. Boop, right there. Now, those controls move with the sofa. I can position my sofa however I want. And if I need to animate the character dipping into this seat here, done. So now I've got all of my controls. I can do this, maybe add a little bit of a flare out on the front so we get that kind of squish outwards. There we go. And then we'll just put the couch in high res mode. So I'll select the geometry, hit 3. So it's nice and high res. And we get that nice squishy look to the front of the couch there. So voila. We now have a piece of geometry that we can animate and maybe animate a little bounce in there and just have all sorts of deformations. And we can add, so we take the same thing that we did here. We could add another lattice to the back of the couch. We could add another lattice to the arm of a couch. And now we have different areas that we can animate fully and independently from each other. So is it important to note that the parenting doesn't work unless you make the boop noise? Exactly. As animators, we have to work. We live in sound effects. Everything has to have a sound effect in it. It won't work correctly if you don't. So yeah, there we go. We have a fully rigged couch. This is not a typical rig. Usually when we talk about rigging, it's like skeletons and skinning, but this is still technically a rig. We're just using a different process to create it. And this can be applied to any object. It could be a couch, it could be a sofa, it could be a pillow, it could be maybe a curtain, like a soft curtain that you want a character to lean against. It could be anything, any soft material that you want a little bit of flex in there. You can do something like this. And we now have a nice clean control. The last thing I would do is I would take the entire selection here, group all of this, and let's just call this sofa rig. There we go. Now in my outliner, it's nice and clean. I don't have a whole bunch of objects listed here. I just have this one object that I can move around. Done. So yeah, and that's pretty much it. So hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully it was interesting. It definitely gives you a lot more creativity. Once you learn how to do this and use this in your workflows, when you're having to animate a scene of a character sitting on a couch, it's just so nice to be able to actually have the couch dip and not just stay flat. I've seen so many shots like that. When I was a student, I had a shot like that where a character sat on a bench. And originally I had thought, okay, it's going to be a nice soft bench. Partway through animating, this was before I knew any of this, I just went, this is not going to work. It looks so bad. So I made a wooden bench. That, like, everything had to be a wooden chair, a wooden bench, a wooden stool to put their feet on. It just kind of looks bland after a while when every shot is a hard surface. It's so nice to be able to put something in your reel where the characters physically interact with something like this. It looks so cool. And you don't need cloth simulation or anything else like that. You can, but that's a whole other topic, and there's a lot more consideration you have to go with cloth simulation that can make it really cool and more intuitive, but also a lot more work and a lot more headache to get it just right.